Good evening. This is the Policy Committee meeting for August the 15th. We are in the administration building. It is 5:30, right? Yes. We on time? Very good. Ms. Van Twyver is here. Ms. O'Hensi is here. Mr. Mosier is here by phone, so that means all votes are taken by roll call. We have Mrs. Fitzpatrick, and we have Robin. Pronounce your name again for me. Abodili, and Lisa Gingras.
I think I said it wrong.
It's okay.
Sometime I'm going to get it right.
Eventually.
Eventually. You have to come more often. I'd like to welcome.
You're never gonna get out of here.
Don't look at that as punishment.
I'd like to welcome Donna Fitzpatrick, our assistant superintendent, to policy. She is going to be their representative to the policy committee, and so we welcome you.
Thank you.
And we also have Mr. Farrington. Sorry about that, George. Almost
That's fine.
forgot you again.
That's fine.
Okay, so tonight we have 5 things that we're going to be talking about. The first one is the wellness policy, JLCF. The second one is concussion and head injuries, JLCJ. The third one is naming school facilities on an area within a facility, which is FF. And then if time permits, and I hope it does, that we'll be able to talk about a proposed school psychology policy. So, let's start with the wellness policy. The last meeting was in June, we went through the wellness policy, and everything was okay with it. We approved it, but then there was a question about recess before lunch and why it was not addressed in this policy. So, and I think that's why Mrs. Abdul is here.
So I appreciate having a chance to talk to all of you about why that was a decision that we didn't put it into the wellness policy. And I think if we go back to the Board of Ed meeting where the principals who do not have recess before lunch spoke out about it, they just felt that it was difficult for them to change their schedule to have recess before lunch. The wellness team recommends it as a best practice, but we didn't feel that it was up to us to put it in a policy and mandate it, and then maybe make people have to change their schedule in a way that they're not happy with, and then it's not embraced, and it's not, I don't think it will be successful that way. I think that each school has to figure out what the best schedule is for themselves, and be happy with their schedule so that they can feel successful in getting through their day. So it's not something that is mandated by the USDA. So when we look for how we're, the language in our wellness policy and the updates that we put in place, we look at the USDA's final rule where they actually require us to update this policy. It's typically every 3 years. And we followed all their guidelines. So myself and Amy Cassidy sat down and went through things, and then we emailed our recommendations to the wellness team and asked for feedback, and we had a meeting and talked about it additionally. And we all just felt comfortable with the proposal, the changes that we proposed, and didn't feel that it was necessary to put mandatory language when it's not required by the USDA. Help.
Yep. Doris Zoensi.
Thank you. I agree. You have to have it as a voluntary program. The schools have to get on board before they do it, or it won't work. It just absolutely won't work. What I was hoping that we would do, what our former assistant superintendent had recommended, was that we look at IMAH, which he recommended, and I've got copies if everybody wants it. There's one sentence in there that says encourage physical activity, recess periods, one of 9 things that it's recommending.
I have one, thank you.
Oh, okay. Those around. So I wanted to take the wellness report, and I've got the first page of that, and I wanted to take just the one sentence at the bottom that's highlighted. And just put the word encourage before it, so it's not mandatory. Everybody's got a copy of that.
I have that.
Okay, that's great. So if we just say encourage recess before lunch as a best practice and strongly discourage withholding recess as a form of punishment, just add it in as another number in this separate policy. It's not mandatory, it's just recognition of a best practice and an encouragement. And I don't want to dictate it to any schools. Some schools may get on board and some schools may not.
So you're looking at this full sentence here as being part of IMAH?
I don't want to take anything out, so maybe put one between 8 and 9, however the committee wants to number it, but I would recommend in there, and just say encourage, and then take the sentence, recess before lunch as a best practice and strongly discourage, singular, because the tense is different, the withholding of recess as a form of punishment.
So can I ask a question, a clarifying question? So we're actually, the wellness policy is what we're currently talking about. So what you're proposing is a change to IMAH, am I correct?
Correct. And
Okay.
And that's what
Okay.
was recommended at the last policy meeting.
Okay.
Our assistant superintendent said it shouldn't be in this policy, JLCF, but it should be in this one. So that's why I thought it would be a good addition there. It would accomplish the purpose of recognizing the best practice and not making anything mandatory, and hopefully everybody would be supportive of that.
I would be. I think that'd be wonderful to have it in one of our documents to say that, yes, this is what we recommend as a best practice, like you said, without making it mandatory, because we're in agreement that forcing that when people aren't comfortable with it is not going to set it up to be successful.
No.
We want to be successful.
Is that agreeable to the administration?
Yes, and I just want to clarify, so voting on the policy that's
We'll
presented.
take care of that first, and then we'll
Okay,
address the
yeah,
other.
I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page about the
Yes.
order of.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
All right, so let's go back to JLCF. I move the adoption of JLCF as amended at the June meeting.
A second?
All those in favor? Okay, Mr. Mosier? Hello?
Hello, Mr. Mosher? It looks like he's still on. I don't know, maybe he accidentally muted it?
Want to try it again?
Yes, I'm still on.
Oh, okay. Mr. Mosier, how would you vote for JLCF? Did you hear us?
Well, I'd like to make a comment on the whole situation, if I may.
Okay, but can we do this? Whenever you want to speak, you hit a key so that it'll beep at us, and then we'll know you want to speak?
Okay, well,
Okay,
this telephone that I have here is works a little bit differently than what I'm used to.
well,
So that's why you couldn't hear me at first.
okay. Did you mute it?
So I've got it straightened out now, but I can
Okay.
communicate on both.
All right, the
both.
motion is to accept
Right.
JLCF as was amended at the June meeting.
Okay. Yes, now can I give my opinion on the whole idea?
Sure.
You know, I look at the schools as each one having a character of its own and a necessity of its own regarding the lunchtime and recess. And I do believe that having the word mandatory in there, or even the thought of mandatory for the way it had been proposed, is to me abhorrent. I think that each school has its own unique character and its own unique needs as far as the scheduling of the handling of the students. And I would like to have it so that each school can adopt the policy as they see fit, not mandate anything to the schools, because it's not a good idea. Because we have so many times that the state or the feds will come down on us with you have to do this or you have to do that, and which is wrong. Where is our local control? And local control has to do with the schools being able to adopt as they see fit. And that's what I am advocating for.
Okay, there's not going to be, Mrs. Hoensie is not recommending a change to this policy, JLCF. It's the second policy, what is the number, I guess? IMAH. So we're going to consider that next. So I'm going to vote yes on this, Mrs. Hoensie.
Yes.
And you, Mr. Mosher?
All right, yes.
Okay, so it's unanimous. So we will send this forth to the board for adoption at the next full meeting. Okay, so now we'll consider IMAH. And yes,
May you entertain a motion? on
well,
this?
okay, sure.
I move that we adopt IMAH with a single change between 8 and 9. We add encourage recess before lunch as the best practice and strongly discourage the withholding of recess as a form of punishment.
I'll second it.
Thank you.
Is there just any more discussion about that?
So we don't really need to add a number, it would be encourage and then the rest of this sentence. So we don't really need to add another, right? Because it says, what it says right now is encourage physical activity recess periods. And what we're saying is encourage recess before lunch is best practice and strongly discourage.
Well, I think it would be,
An addition?
well, I would say encourage physical activity recess periods and then say
Okay.
the recess before lunch recommendation and then leave the and in there to take up 9.
Gotcha. Okay.
Is that acceptable
Okay.
to you, Ms. Hoensie?
So we just insert it in there. If you can write it up, it's fine with me.
Well, Tara, you've given her the paper, right? She's got it, the wording right there.
Mhm.
So she'll give it to Tara to incorporate.
Okay.
So, guess we have to take another vote. Is there any more discussion about this? Recess before lunch?
That's Mr. Mosher.
Well,
No.
he's expressed it that he was a no.
I have nothing to add.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I will vote yes on this.
I will vote yes.
Mr. Mosher?
Yes.
Okay. That's unanimous, so it will go forward to the full board for adoption. Thank you for coming in.
Thank
You
you
can stay
very
if you
much.
like, but you're welcome to.
I'm going to scoot out because I have another meeting to go to later on, so
Oh,
I
wow.
will be able to not have to rush to that.
Thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you, I
in,
appreciate
Ms.
your
Oak.
time.
And I'll see you soon about wellness committee.
Super.
Thanks.
Do you need an extra copy to put in with the notes? Into the book.
No,
Okay, fine.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I've got it, I'm good.
Okay. So now we're going to consider JLCJ, concussions and head injuries. So would you like to introduce this, Lisa? Or why do we have to make this change?
This was one of the policies. It's been sort of floated around for a couple of years, back to when Jen Susing was assistant superintendent. We had talked about just updating it. It hadn't been updated, I think, since 2012. And a lot has changed in the world of athletics. It's become, concussions is a hot topic. You hear about it with professional sports, you hear about it with high school sports, middle school sports, youth sports, etc. So when Mrs. Fitzpatrick came on board, it was one of the first things we said, because we felt to bring it forward, we feel it's an easy one to update with current practices and sort of get it off your docket, if you will. The first suggestion we make is to rename the policy concussions and head injuries for student athletes, because if you read the policy, that's what it talks about. It's not necessarily talking about students in the classroom and what we do for them and accommodations and things like that. This is specifically about the student athletes. We followed the NFHS guidelines for concussion management, which is the National Federation of High School Sports. The NHIAA does as well. We have athletic trainers at the high school level. We do impact testing. So there's just a few little changes along the way we made. I believe you have copies with red, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you?
I do not, but I can see where the changes were made. So the opening statement, nothing has changed there. Updating in this policy, it actually says that we will come together every spring to review and update this policy. It has been done in 5 years, so that's another reason we felt it was necessary to bring it before you. In the next section where it says identified sports, I'm suggesting we change the word activities to sports, because the NHIA doesn't really have any sanctioned activities. They're all interscholastic athletic sports.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I hear you saying you're going to change the word there to sports.
Yes.
Could we make an adjustment there, say contact sports?
That's a great idea. Sanctioned contact sports. Because you are correct, we do not.
No, because I look at at this from, not only football but from other sports where there is a possibility of headbutting or, bouncing a ball, like soccer or volleyball, where a person can be hit in the head by a ball, which is, well inflated to the legal amount.
Yep.
And depending on the person, this can cause a concussion, even maybe a mild one, but still a concussion.
That's an excellent suggestion, because Mrs. Fitzpatrick and I actually discussed, do we list all of the sports? But we felt that would be too cumbersome, as well as if we add a sport, then we've got to come back to policy to change that. So I think that's an excellent suggestion to add that word contact in there.
Can I say that my concern about saying contact sports is it's possible for a cross-country runner to trip in the woods, fall, and hit their head. They are a student athlete. They're performing in a school-based event. Those kids fall under this concussion policy as well. So I'm afraid that if we put contact in there, we may be excluding some student athletes that could potentially get hurt in their events.
Well, don't you think that when you make a bump on the head, whether it be a tree branch or with falling on the ground, that it's still a contact with a hard object and subject to possibly the concussion the same way?
I do, but if you look at the definition of contact sport, cross country doesn't fall into that, track and field doesn't fall into that.
Gymnastics wouldn't fall into it.
Yeah, so that's,
Actually, it does.
yeah.
Does it? Is it
So
contact sport?
unless I'm wrong, and actually you're the athletic
Really?
director, so I could
Contact
be,
with the mat.
I could,
Wait a minute.
yeah, and so
Okay.
you may be correct. But in my head, in my thinking, I'm thinking that it's too exclusive to put the word contact there. I could be wrong.
because you're thinking about personal contact. Where one body against another one.
Okay.
But also, I'm thinking about, how about the football practice where you're using the one of the
Practice
football dummies, and you run into that and head first, and that's still a contact sport.
Mm-hmm.
That's still part of the training,
Right.
and I think that would be covered by the same thing. You make contact with any hard object, and
But that's,
still
Mr.
it's personal contact.
It also depends on, I guess, the purpose of why that section is even here. Are those the identified sports that we're saying students can receive concussions in? Or is that section stating those students that we are going to impact test? What's the purpose of that section? Because right now there are very few sports that we don't consider contact sports. Cross country, golf, tennis, track,
I'll make further suggestions.
swimming.
That we can clarify it by having it as a contact sport, any other sport contacting any hard object with the head.
Or you could just leave it sports.
Leave it at sports.
Leave it as sports, I think, yeah. Why do you have cheer squads and dance squads? Why was that sectioned out?
We don't have,
You said that it was because,
we don't
they
have
don't
dance.
have them.
Right, we don't have dance in any of our schools.
but it's not an NHIAA sanction.
It is. Cheer is an NHIAA sanctioned sport.
Oh, then why do you have to separate that out?
I consider cheer a sport. Some people don't. So we felt for emphasis to make sure that those who don't consider cheer a sport know that we are including it.
We
So-
don't call it cheerleading anymore.
Depends who you talk to. If you talk to the cheerleaders, they call themselves cheerleaders.
Cheerleading is one of these things. My granddaughter was severely concussed
Mm-hmm.
in cheerleading practice in Prospect Mountain.
Yep.
And it has affected her life ever since.
Yep.
So
It's a lot of
I think
contact.
that- yeah, she was practicing and she was dropped on her head.
Right.
And contact with personal contact with the hard floor that put her into a thing where she had been under treatment for years on account of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we had to take a look at, there's one such thing as, personal contact, and another thing is, hard head meets the immovable object.
Right.
But if we leave the word sports in there and cheer squad, then all of those potential situations are covered by that language.
Right. Right. The proposal is to eliminate the word
Yeah,
dance.
Well, I was just using that as an example.
Yep.
And, what we do with it is certainly up to the committee. But there is a possibility of severe concussed, really concussed by being in practice and what is recognized as a sport. I don't know if we do recognize cheerleading as a sport.
Okay, I think we've agreed then that we'll leave it, that paragraph by the way it's written in the way it is amended.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question on the next paragraph.
Yes.
Coach training.
Yes.
You crossed out one of the following means. One, through viewing the NHIAA Sports Specific Rules Clinic.
Yes. So our coaches do sport-specific rules reviews every year, but it doesn't necessarily come into play in this policy. It doesn't really cover concussions and head injuries. So I didn't know why it was part of this policy. They do every 2 years do the online concussion course as recommended by the NFHS. So they do the rules review, but it really is about their sport and rule changes specific to their sport and not necessarily about concussions and head injuries.
So it's not relevant to this policy.
It's not relevant to the policy.
Okay.
The only other big change on the next page is talking about our athletic trainers being recognized as healthcare providers. We contract with Performance Rehab. They hire expert certified athletic trainers. They are the ones, first and foremost, who meet with our student athletes once they become concussed. They're on the sidelines. They're the ones who determine, you have a head injury, you're concussed, you're not going back in, and they start the return to play protocol the next day. So that's the biggest change, is that statement that a student athlete is evaluated by a healthcare provider, including our licensed athletic trainers.
Mr. Farrington.
This is an area that I had a question about. So are we saying here that, we'll talk football because it's usually, that's what usually comes up. So a student gets injured or comes out of a game, the athletic trainer determines that he has been concussed.
Mhm.
He doesn't go back in. But can that athletic trainer clear him for the next game without him ever seeing a physician?
There have been times. That the athletic trainers, again, they go through the training on proper return to play protocol. We have our impact testing at the high school level. They go through, it's a 7 to 10 day protocol that takes place. They have the very first step being returning to their baseline testing.
Mhm.
And until they do that, they don't even move into the next step of any form of physical activity. There have been times where a physician has cleared a player to return to play, and our athletic trainers still hold them back because their baseline's not back up to play. Their symptoms return the minute they get on a stationary bike or things like that.
Yeah. I don't mean to take anything away from them.
Nope, I understand.
mean, I think of it if it was one of my children. And I would want them to, in addition to seeing an athletic trainer, I would want them to see somebody that's trained in this particular area. And I don't know how everybody else feels about it, but that's one of the things that stood out that caught my eye, that I like the baseline, and I think that's a great place to start. But I wonder if there's something else that a physician should be looking for, particularly if it's a second or third
Right,
event.
right. And that's a whole different ball of wax.
We're
Well,
gonna talk
isn't
about
that
that
what
here.
you,
I don't necessarily think it's in here about repeated concussions. And maybe we need to talk about the evaluation and the determination that a student is concussed, separate from who can identify their return to play. Because we've run into a few situations where our student athlete has been concussed, the athletic trainer notifies the school nurse, the assistant principals, the guidance counselors, that the student has been concussed, this is how they became concussed, and we've had some pushback from some school nurses saying, that's not a doctor, that student can't get in class accommodations. So that's more, I think, where
Also
I'm
internal,
trying,
Yeah,
where I'm trying to get it part of the policy, that if one of our trainers says a kid is concussed, then that should be good enough, I guess,
To make academic accommodations.
to make academic accommodations.
could we add that? I don't know.
So that's where I'm not sure how you would want to reword that.
I don't have a
I'd like-
problem with that.
Yep.
My concern is more getting them
The
back
other end.
onto the
Mhm.
onto the playing field.
Yep.
I'd like to get back to the part that you were talking about, Mr. Farrington, isn't that about seeing a doctor? Isn't that what it says, is to be evaluated by a healthcare provider?
But
Isn't that what that implies?
in the red line section above that Lisa just read to you, that identifies licensed athletic trainers as being healthcare providers. Right? Isn't that the intent of that
Mm-hmm.
phrase? So as I read it, they are the healthcare provider who can determine that there has been a concussion, and that the way it's written right here, they can be the person that clears the student based on this series of testing to return to the field, because they are a healthcare provider, and that's where my question
Yeah, but
comes from.
Well,
Well, let's ask Lisa what the intent is. Is
That was
that's
part of the intent.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, because
but they
again,
must go see a doctor, right?
No.
They don't
Not-
have to go
no.
see a doctor?
it's encouraged. We suggest it, but there are times where the athletic trainer. What has happened in the past is we get the note from the doctor, okay, the student can go back and return to play, but then the trainer puts them through the return to play protocol after that.
I would think they would have to. I mean, that's going to cover.
So I'm worried.
I would think they should have to clear both hurdles.
I'm worried about putting in here that a doctor's note clears them to return to play.
But I don't think that is.
No disrespect to any doctors,
No.
none whatsoever.
Well-
but athletic training and yes, you're healthy enough to go back to class. They're two very different things. Your heart rates and your blood flow and all that
Yeah.
stuff is very, very different. you're sitting in a classroom versus running around a soccer field.
Well, I believe that the district needs to cover itself and okay that
Agree.
this kid is, but the doctors, they still should see the doctor.
Okay.
But, and I thought that even though, well, I don't know how we straighten that out. So that when a kid has a problem, is concussed, I hate that word. Sounds like he's cussing. The family is notified, right?
Yes.
So it's the family that decides to send them to the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't send them to the doctor, then the kid comes back to how did they parents
Then-
would decide to come back to school? I mean,
Right.
I don't understand, but
Right. And it does require, in addition to the medical clearance, they also have to have written permission from the parent guardian after a head injury to return to play.
after a medical exam,
Yes, after medical clearance,
Is
the
that-
parents also have to sign off saying, yes, I understand my child has been concussed, has been out of play, based on, either the doctor's clearance or the trainer's clearance, or a combination of two. The parents also have to sign off.
is that part of the 7-day protocol?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And it's actually right there in the policy.
Mm-hmm.
Student athlete shall also present written permission from a parent guardian to return to play.
Well, it sounds to me like, yeah, I see her hand. Miss Hoyansey.
Thank you.
Well, I have to have a chance too, Miss Hoyansey, and I don't have to call my own name.
I'm not questioning that, thank you. I would support this, and I think the reason that Mrs. Gingras has stated it makes sense. You're not always going to a doctor, so you don't want to explicitly hardwire that in. If the athletic trainer is going to suggest that there's any question, they're going to recommend or they're going to require. So they're going to, maybe you need to do this test or that test. It's implicit in there. But I think having those athletic trainers is the final say. Even if the doctor says, okay, there's no evidence we see, putting them back slowly and carefully, I think I like the way it's worded. I think it's comprehensive.
And the other piece of this is, to reiterate, is the idea that the student can get accommodations academically because you can't always see how a concussion impacts a student
Right.
unless you're trained to see it.
Right.
So classroom teachers, the sooner they're notified, the sooner students can have the accommodations they need to recover and keep up with academics. So I think that that's really the underlying reason for changing the wording.
Right.
So it's really about kids.
It's always about kids.
Mr. Farrington.
So let's come back to the case of multiple concussions in some given time frame. That seems to be, I don't claim to be an expert, but the things that you read and hear, that seems to be its a cumulative effect in most of these
Yes.
instances. Should that be addressed in this policy? A second concussion in a season of football or a third or something? I don't know what the criteria would be. I have no
Right.
idea.
And I would want to go back to our head trainer and have that conversation. But our training staff, a second concussion, the kid's going to go to the doctor. It's going to take longer through the return to play protocol for that student to return. So whether it needs to be explicitly stated in the policy, or we need to trust the people that we hire who are licensed and certified, I don't know.
Is it explicitly stated in the protocol? Multiple concussions? And I'm wearing two hats here. I want to protect the district. I have that responsibility, but I also want to protect the kids like everybody else does. And I
Right.
just want to be absolutely sure that
Oh, if it states
you've got a kid
specifically.
that's had 2 concussions and the Turkey Bowl's coming up and he's a senior and he wants to play and his parents want him to play because they think that'll make the difference in the scholarship. All these things come together,
Right.
and I don't want to put the kid at risk.
And again, that goes back to my experience with our trainers.
Mhm.
And I've been on the sideline with them when, they've come right out and they'll say to the coach, this is the second one. He's done for a while. So I know they send home with the student when they contact the parent. There's information that they're handed. These are signs and symptoms to watch for. And I'm pretty sure on that is if this is a second or a third, we recommend this.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I can.
And please understand, I'm not questioning the professionalism or qualification of any of these people. I'm just concerned.
I agree with you. I understand that.
Mr. Mosher, do you have any questions?
I don't have a question, no, but I agree with Mr. Farrington about the including something in there about a physician. I think that in the original policy that we passed some time ago, that we had that in there, that depending on the evaluation, at the time by the trainer, that he would say that would have to have a clearance by a physician. Now, give an example. The family physician would have a baseline on the student, and they could compare the baseline with the results of the concussion. And this way, he could either okay it or remove him from the lineup for the present time until a certain amount of recovery would be expected. And as far as the second or third, I think that at the second concussion, that they would be restricted from play for a period of time until such time as an authority would say that he was fit to play.
The one thing, oops, sorry.
And if the authority had to be the family physician or a physician designated by the district, so be it.
So I have a couple of things to address there. One being, I'm a little concerned about us just specifying a physician. We are finding more and more of our students, families don't have insurance, families don't have primary care physicians. They're going into these walk-in clinics.
Yep.
That these walk-in clinics don't have a relationship with the students, don't know the family histories. So if it's I just walk in and at that moment in time, the student isn't showing any symptoms, are they going to come back with a note from a physician that clears them?
I would like to add also that the policy as it currently is says that they have to be evaluated by a healthcare provider. That could be a physician's assistant, that
Right.
could be a nurse practitioner. That is not necessarily a medical doctor.
Right.
And that's why the athletic trainers are specifically trained in head injury.
Right.
So that they, in my opinion, are the experts in this area.
And the other piece I'd like to address that Mr. Mosier mentioned is either their physician or, I'm going to paraphrase what you said, but you said something about the district's physician. We do have a neuropsychologist, Dr. Ted Davis, that works very closely with our athletic trainers on our students with concussions and head injuries. He's the one who reads our impact testing. Our trainers are constantly in communication if we have an odd case, or multiple concussions or things like that. So that's the other piece that's sort of underlying behind it. So even though, Dr. Davis doesn't have the relationship and the connection with the student, he is providing consultation behind the scenes.
Mr. Farrington?
Does that satisfy Mr. Farrington?
Maybe. So here's my question. I'd be curious to know if in fact the protocol does have written out the fact that after, and I don't know what it is, a second or third concussion, that the student will be required to meet a physician, and I think like you say, a neurologist or somebody like that would be more appropriate. And then how do we, if they don't have insurance or whatever,
Right.
is this the person that you just mentioned? Is that the person that would be responsible for doing that? Do we have that kind of arrangement? How do we deal with that?
He reads our impact tests and things like that and consults with our trainers. There have been a couple of occasions where he's met with a student, but it's not something that's regular. In that case.
I guess going forward, I'd be curious to know, in talking to them,
What
how they
happens
train,
in
how they,
subsequent-
what their follow-up would be with a student who'd had a second or third concussion, needed to see a neurologist, and the family didn't have any insurance or anything like that,
What happens?
how that's provided for. And I mean, I don't want to just throw them off the team saying you can't get to a doctor, you can't play.
Right.
But I want him to make sure the student gets access to proper health care.
So Hensy,
I move that we adopt JLCJ as amended.
second. Any discussion? Hearing none, then I will vote yes. Ms. O'Hensy?
I will vote yes.
Mr. Mosier?
Yes.
Okay, motion is passed and it will be sent to the board for full approval.
Since you made it clear you wanted to leave early after this, I felt obligated to give you a hard time.
I appreciate that, Mr. Barrington. Can always count on you.
You bet.
Thank you.
for coming.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
And I'll see you tomorrow.
I will see you tomorrow. There you go.
Okay, the next one is policy FF, which is naming school facilities or an area within a facility. Would you like to address the topic?
In talking with Dr. Mosley, our hope is that we would be able to add in the paragraph that gives the superintendent some latitude to work with outside business and community organizations and to secure donations and work with organizations to reach an agreement on recognition. The assumption is that the superintendent is working in the best interest of the district, and that if we're able to get donations, there can be some kind of reasonable agreement with them about how they're recognized, and to hopefully streamline the policy so that that is a possibility for the superintendent to make those decisions, always in the best interest of the district and students, but also being able to move ahead with donations and agreements with outside organizations. To give a blatant example, kids are not going to walk into a school that's got golden arches on the outside of the school, as an example. That would not be something that would happen. And the hope is that in the board's wisdom, they appoint someone who's going to use their judgment in the best interest of the district and in the best interest of students. So the proposal is to add the paragraph that does give the superintendent some latitude in that area.
Okay, it says, in addition, the board recognizes the superintendent's need to work with outside community and/or business organizations to secure donations and work with that organization and/or business to reach agreement on recognition to that organization company, keeping the best interests of the school district and the students of the district in the forefront of those discussions. I fully agree that he should have some latitude in doing that, but I'm a little concerned about the part that it says to reach an agreement on recognition to that organization. We have a whole policy, DDA, that describes awards and things like that, grants. And I personally feel that this should be addressed in DDA rather than in FF, but So, Mr. Farrington?
Yeah, I think that, I understand what he's up against. I think this policy was originally intended to recognize some great achievement in education or something like that and name a building after someone. I mean, this is Dr. Massey building. This is the Barad Massey building, named after a former superintendent. And there are other things, and of course, there's a qualification in here. You have to 5 years is supposed to have passed before you make that sort of recognition, so that everybody doesn't get caught up in the moment because somebody was named Teacher of the Year and nobody wants to vote no, and so all of a sudden it's 5 years later nobody can remember why it's the Mary Schwartz Elementary School. So I think that this is not necessarily where you want it, and I don't know if we want a separate policy, but I think that a lot of the things that we find ourselves with, BAE is the one that has come up recently. They're making a donation, a very nice donation to the North High School, some 4 or 5 tanks for the Marine Robotics Program. It's a great contribution. I think they should be recognized for it. But I think that I see those things more as partners in education, and I think that if we just look at it as being able to name something, sooner or later we're going to run out of things to name, and then what are we going to do? And so I'd like to see it addressed somewhere else so that we can talk about partners in education and not just how much money we can get, but can we establish a partnership? Can we develop internships? Can they be involved in a mentorship program in the district? Fidelity comes fairly regularly and does lots of projects at Elm Street School. You're going to have to decide what is a building worth, what is a playing field worth, and I think if we're going to do this and do it right, I think it needs to have a lot more conversation around it and what we want to accomplish.
George, you have a very good idea there, and
Thank you, Bill.
I was just thinking about the same thing. For instance, a science lab that we may have that could be named after somebody like Dean Kamen, who has contributed so much to the development of the prosthetics, the water thing, and Honduras, and pure water equipment that they've devised, and it's continually involved in the robotics and in the field of science. So just like BAE, I'd say, yeah, that sounds like a logical place to do it. I also think about other people that have contributed. And the thing that came to my mind was Dean Kamen, because I followed him in some of the things that he's developed. And right now I know he's working on prosthetic limbs that are going to revolutionize the thing for amputees and the veterans coming back from combat. So I don't know if you want to think about that. That might be another good person.
If I could add, I think a good place to start might be surveying our schools and see what partners they have now, because I think there are a lot of things that go on.
That would be a first step.
There are a lot of things that are going on now. I wonder if we shouldn't have some place outside the administration building or someplace in town where we acknowledge big sign that says these are our partners in education, and let them put up their names.
Sure. Okay.
If we really want to go down this road, and I think we should.
That would be a very logical thing to do, and I would support that in a heartbeat.
Ms. Hohansey?
Thank you. I see it as 2 separate things. I don't really have a problem with this policy. We've already named all our buildings. There's very few buildings left to name. They might be able to put up a plaque or a room or an area, as it says. I don't feel threatened by that. I think that's appropriate. I'm more worried about partnerships. Partnerships, there's a give and a take, an expectation back and forth. That's far more complex. So you're opening up a whole new can of worms. Something where they just give donations and everybody's happy about it with a little plaque. That's a simple relationship. When you've got a partnership where you have expectations about ongoing interns back and forth and what the relationship expects, that we need a lot of discussion on it, and I don't think that's what he's asking for here. So whereas that might be good, especially to start taking an inventory of where we are, that's great. But I think the request is very simple, and if you think of it as simple, not a partnership, just donations in exchange for recognition, I don't have a problem with the proposal. I would support it.
Should I rebut?
Go ahead, because I mean,
No, I just think that, again, this policy, I think, is geared to something different, and I think the policy that you referenced may be more appropriate place to look to put it.
DDA.
and I do believe that that his intention is more than just, giving us $10,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
To me, the way I read it, it sounded like he was looking for us to allow him to go and make these relationships with people, and if they're big enough, and he's going to want to be able to tell them what we're going to do for them in return, that bothers me, because we do have DD. What did I say it was? DDA that is where it's more appropriate to say, because DDA it's like $10,000 or more. The district is going to, that comes to the board. So I think we'll take this back to Dr. Mosley and resubmit it.
And look at DDA. when
Yep,
you do that.
and
Okay.
the recommendations that Mr. Farrington has made about recognizing how we're going to recognize people. You might want to invite Mr. Farrington to that meeting.
Oh, good.
He doesn't have enough to
Teach me to
do.
be quiet, huh?
Yes.
Would not want anything that we do that would encourage any personal or corporate vanity by having their names portrayed on or in one of our facilities.
So is that agreeable to everybody? Send it back to administration for further
Yes,
investigating.
it's agreeable.
Thank you. Mr. Mosier agreed.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, moving right along, we now have the school psychologist policy recommendation, and this is Mrs. Hohensi's recommendation. And we have the head psychologist here, Mr.
Dr. Mark LeCare.
Dr. Mark LeCare. I should know that, doctor.
That's okay. No worries. Apologize for being late.
Well, that's fine.
I thought it was good
We
timing.
didn't, yeah, I thought it was rather smart of you not to have to sit through the others if you're not. So, Mrs. Hohensi, if you would like to present your,
Well, as I say in the back, I looked online and I got another model policy, and I have a copy of that, and I put a couple things together. The problem that presented itself after the budget process, I was assured in all the communication with the psychologist that a child or a student would never be removed from the classroom without the knowledge or permission of the parent. There are some students that are taken out on a regular basis and they have an agreement that they sign at the beginning of the year, and the parent is fully informed of what's going on. 3 days after the budget issue was resolved, I got a parent who called me and her child was taken out of the classroom. I immediately asked all those contacts that I had that were informing me what school psychologists do and the necessity of them, and I got no response. The administration, I got no response. I wanted to know why this parent wasn't informed of why the child was taken out. Thankfully, the child told the parent, so the parent knew what was going on, but I never got an explanation. So I don't want to throttle our school psychologists in any way. I want them to continue to operate the way they are. So I put this policy together because we don't have one. I used some models and I talked to a couple nurses and different people that I knew to get their feedback and tried to make the best language, and I welcome input from the psychology department. What I'm trying to do is, if you take a child out, if there's an emergency, and I recognize there will be emergencies, that you take the child out and the parent doesn't know. But 24 hours later, the parent should be informed. If the parent's still not informed, then we've got a log where you start tracking it. I want to know, in what cases is this district taking children out of the classroom and not informing the parents, and the reasons why. No names, and then the log goes to the superintendent, and he makes a report to the board at some point during the year. So we're just keeping tabs and tracking. Is this a big issue? Is this a little issue? I have no idea. But a parent shouldn't have to worry. My child's going to school and I don't know if the child will be taken out to the school psychologist, and I don't know why, and I don't know if it'll repeat. That parent has still never been told. And this is months. So I just want closure on this issue, and this was my solution to that, and that's why I presented it.
Do we have a administrative procedure that covers this situation that Ms. O'Hensy's talking about? Doctor?
Well, I guess I would want to back up, and I guess what I want to share with the group, and I think this will be reassuring in a lot of ways, is that for the majority of students that school psychologists work with, provide services to, they are students who have IEPs.
Right.
And so the services are prescribed within the IEP. So it says how often they're going to meet with the psychologist, how long, what the goals and objectives are, and the parents have agreed to all of that ahead of time. And so I would say that the policy that's proposed, it would be redundant with all of that, I would say. There are other instances when school psychologists might work with a student that is not identified. And that happens in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's a parent calling us saying, I'm concerned that my child has an anger management problem and I think he could use some support. He's gotten into trouble at school, on the playground, he doesn't know what to do when he gets angry. And so we may work with a student who's not identified under that kind of an arrangement. Sometimes it's at the recommendation of the administrator. And I would say in almost every situation, it's, the parents are aware of that, from the beginning and moving forward. There's that piece. I guess the other thing, Lou, that I'm wondering about is, so school psychologists are not the only ones that work, are not the only folks that work with kids and talk to kids. So there are guidance counselors and social workers and nurses and administrators and special ed teachers that work with kids who have some emotional struggles, all of whom may pull a kid out of class and talk to them. And so I guess when I got the policy, it felt like, why is this being targeted only at school psychologists, and why would it not apply to other disciplines that work with children?
Do you have an answer to that?
Yeah.
Okay, just off the top of my head, a psychologist, a social worker or a guidance counselor doesn't keep a medical record for the student. I know there's certain instances where if you have mental health issues, you may have adverse conditions getting into the military. So, these are things that parents should know what's going on. It's just, there's a different level of records that are kept when you see a psychologist. That's a medical professional versus a guidance counselor. They're going to recommend things on courses, they're going to maybe on discipline, maybe on behavior a little bit, but they're not going to write a medical report that could technically follow the child for years afterwards. So it has more ramifications. And I'm not saying, I would think everything that you do in the school is 100% fine. I just want this reassurance for those cases where we're not tracking and parents aren't, those odd cases. Maybe all the reasons are great, but unless we track it, unless we know, as a board, I'm not doing my due diligence to know, and I don't want the names of anybody in this log. It's just to keep track. Maybe it's once a year, maybe it's 10 times a year, maybe it's 100 times a year. I have no idea the scope of the situation. And I know parents are far more concerned when their child goes to see the school psychologist than if he goes to see the guidance counselor. They don't usually call me and complain. It's a different category. And I don't want to pass this tonight. I want your input. I would like you to look at it, mark it up. I think some of it is just informative, and if I've got it wrong, I would love to have it corrected. And your suggestions, unless
Right.
you've done that already,
Right.
I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah. No, well, I do have a lot of thoughts and ideas and some concerns as well. I mean, I think it's important to point out that there is a little bit of a difference, though, between a school psychologist and a clinical psychologist working in a clinical setting or in a private practice. We're educational professionals. We educate kids, and I would disagree. I would believe that guidance counselors and social workers are keeping records in a way that are pretty similar to the records that psychologists keep within school districts. So people keep records of the kids that they've met with and talked to. So I think that those records would be fairly similar, and I don't think that much difference.
I don't think the guidance counselor is equipped to make a mental health report. They can do discipline. They can talk about a few behaviors, but a mental health report carries a different weight than a disciplinary record.
But the only times that we would write, the only time we would write a mental health report or a psychological report is when a child has been referred for an evaluation of that sort. And we would only do that kind of an evaluation with parental consent. So that's the only time that we do a psychological mental health evaluation and offer some psychological insight as to perhaps what's going on with a child. We don't make, I know there was a mention about diagnoses. We don't make DSM diagnoses. We try to capture what's affecting a child and how it's affecting their ability to get their education, and strive to make recommendations that are sort of educationally based. So I think there is, when I was reading through the policy, it seemed like something that derived more of a medical or a clinical kind of setting, and not so much related to what happens within a school type setting. So there's mention of psychiatry reports. We don't hire psychiatrists. We don't have those kinds of reports.
Would you be adverse to taking a copy and modifying it and, striking what you think is objectionable and then giving it back to the committee so we can work from there? Because it's a lot. We don't have any policy. And I think it's good for parents to know, like, just the fact that they can withdraw from working with a psychologist. I mean, that was, I'd never thought of that. So it just gives them, it tells them, what confidentiality, what different transactions, and so they can understand the process. If you could add or subtract to this, that would be great.
Yeah.
But I want to start the conversation because
That's what I would like.
I have parents that just are very concerned.
If it's all right, the school psychology department meets with some regularity, and it might be nice to see if we could pull together a sort of a committee of psychologists that might work on this with me, and we could you know, I think I understand where you're coming from in terms of wanting to make sure that parents have some idea of what's going on with their child. And I think it's important to think about how do we communicate this and how do we balance the parent's right to know with, you know, I do think that there are some, you know, mature minors, maybe a 17-year-old that's close to being 18. I think sometimes they do have a right to some measure of privacy, because there are sometimes issues that they bring to us that are very, very sensitive, and they may not be ready right at that moment to share that information with their parents. And so I think we have to figure out a way to be able to communicate with parents what needs to be communicated, but also not create obstacles that would prevent students from being able to access a psychologist or a guidance counselor or a social worker. I mean, that's what we encourage kids. If you're struggling with something, if you're upset about something, if you're worried about, come talk to somebody. Don't keep it in. Come and talk.
Well, that's what I'd hope is we'd have a conversation, because I don't want to restrict, stop, or in any way impede what you're doing.
Yeah.
I just want to know a little bit more about it. I want a policy so parents know a lot more about it, and to track how many of these cases are off the grid in terms of the parent doesn't know. And you might be right, when they're older, this was elementary school, they're not close to 16, 18. They're quite a bit younger. So I think it just helps us understand the scope of the problem we've got in our school. It would help us to understand, the need for a psychologist, again, by looking at some of this. So.
We certainly would welcome a conversation about that. I mean, it's the fact that folks are taking an interest in sort of the work we do and what we do and wanting to try to understand what we do, I think I feel real positive about that.
That's good.
That's good.
Mr. Farrington?
How many parents are we talking about?
I'm not going to...
I'm not asking for names, I'm just asking how many.
It's irrelevant if there's 1 or 100.
No, I think it's relevant.
I'm not answering the question.
Okay, no answer. The other question I had, just out of curiosity, when I Google school psychologist, I get results like the National Association of School Psychologists in Bethesda, Maryland, the American Psychological Association from Washington, D.C. But the only reference that I see in yours is the School Psychology India promoting mental health since 2006, Tamil Nadu, India. Just out of curiosity, what drew you to that?
I looked at a lot of different places. This was a form that parents signed at the beginning of the year. I didn't want a form that they signed, but it was informative. It had bullet items. It had different categories. And I thought it was interesting. I thought it was informative. It explained some of the things. It broke it out into categories better than I could. So I started with that as a framework and then added some things that I was interested in. Because the log, tracking it and allowing them to continue. I mean, I don't want to impede progress or get in the way of it in any way, shape, or form. I just want to know what kind of a situation we're dealing with in our district. And
Mrs. Swansea, can that not be done by conversation with these people? I mean, why do we?
I think parents.
You don't bring anybody here that can validate your concerns. And we don't know that there's a problem. We don't write policy just for 1 or 2 people. If you have a problem, if a parent has a problem, they should follow the command up the command of principal, assistant, superintendent, and all the way up. But if it's 1 or 2 people, I don't think it's worth our time to write a policy on this.
Number one.
But I'm willing to let this thing. I'm encouraged that this conversation will go on, and maybe it can resolve your fears that we don't have a problem in this school district of children being pulled out of class to the psychologist without the parent knowing it.
We have 1,700, or 17,000 kids?
Oh, I think it's 13,000.
11,000.
Okay, so we have all these parents, they're concerned about their students. Having a policy is just informative. We don't have any policy. We spend over $1 million a year on psychologists. So having a basic
I don't think
streamlined policy is not harmful.
we've had 11,000 parents coming to the administration to talk about this problem, that they feel it's a
You're
concern.
correct. You're correct. They all haven't. But many of them are concerned. They don't know. The friends of anybody, if a student was pulled, that parent talks to another, so you've got a number of parents that are concerned. This, I want to calm
But
them.
that's all hearsay amongst the
You're not going to get a parent to come in here and explain to you what the problem was when they're too afraid to go to their own school administrators. Why
That's
is,
a different issue,
why-
though. That's
okay.
a different issue.
okay, but what am I supposed to do? Tell them, get over your fear?
No, you suggest that maybe you go along with them to the principal and discuss the problem.
I was more than willing.
Well, I probably shouldn't have suggested that. But, anyways, I think the way that we should proceed with this is for the doctor to get his group together and modify this policy. And if you wish to attend them, if they wish to have you there to answer questions or whatever, that's fine, I think. And come bring it back to the policy committee when you think it's done or completed or satisfactory or however.
Mhm.
Is that acceptable to you, Ms. O'Hensey?
Yes, I think that'd be great.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you
I
very much.
appreciate. Yep, you're welcome.
I did want to ask, included in the packet was this article that Mark was nice
Yeah,
enough
yeah,
to
that's-
contribute. And to Mr. Farrington's point, it's from the National Association of School Psychologists, so I hope you take the time to
I
read
did.
it.
I
Okay.
did. It was
Thank
very,
you.
very informative.
Good.
Thank you.
Mr. Mosier, do you have anything? It's evidently gone to silence.
Well, I heard him making noise, but
Yeah.
may have been snoring.
Did the administration have anything to add to this that,
No, I think that Mark was eloquent in his points, and I understand what Mrs. Hennessy is saying, and I think that more conversation is a good thing.
I think more conversation would be good, more mutual understanding. I mean, I you know, as the chief school psychologist, I haven't heard, I haven't had parents calling saying that what you were mentioning is a problem. But again, maybe they don't call us. Maybe they go to other people. But I want certainly we want all parents to feel comfortable with the work we're doing. Certainly not trying to do anything in a clandestine manner or trying to hide anything. And most times we work pretty closely with parents. There are some times when there may be some good reasons why a parent hasn't been contacted, at least not right away. And I would just be very hesitant to come up with any policy that will really restrict access.
Not
In
wanting
any
to
way.
restrict at all in any way.
okay?
Okay.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming in.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
We don't believe that for a minute.
With that, I'm going home to have dinner.
See you, Mark.
All right, see ya.
Okay, I think we have, yes, Ms. O'Hensey.
I talked to Mrs. Zine, and since this is a once-a-month policy committee, I brought a copy of BDEB with that one sentence we were talking about in HR. I wanted to know if you were willing to look at that and then send it over to HR, or, because they pretty much had a sentence, every member of the board shall be invited to observe all rounds of interviews for candidates for these positions, which are director and above including principals.
Mhm.
So it's just one sentence and we wanted to come through policy.
It was my understanding, though, from that meeting that it was going to go back to HR for the whole committee to revamp or not revamp, but review the whole policy and then bring that to this committee.
Well, I believe, talking to Mrs. Zine, and my understanding at the meeting was that was the sentence we wanted. The compromise was we didn't want, as a committee, to do anything without going through policy first. So, she recommended, she has said, she gave me my blessing to bring this, because we do have other director positions. I don't want to sit there and talk about each one and say, can we get in? I don't, and this says observe, this doesn't say participate. Dr. Mosley said we can observe and then participate. Just leaving it as observe. If he wants to change anything or make any extra, but I just want to keep it very simple so that the board can observe. I thought it was extremely beneficial, and another board, Mr.
I don't understand why Mrs. Ziem didn't come tonight herself to present that.
Because she had a long week. We had a long day yesterday.
Mr. Farrington?
My recollection of that conversation was the argument at the time was this is a high profile, one of our two largest schools, and that the board wanted to be involved, and that the agreement was that we would go follow this course that's been taking place for the last few days to get through that hiring, and then the whole thing would be revisited at another time. And so now this seems to be suggesting it's going to be for directors and everybody. And so I think to just bring it in without even having been on the agenda and to move it forward would be unnecessary, maybe a little haphazard. My understanding was it was a one-time, let's agree to do this for this particular hiring because it's a timely thing. We're going to start on the following Monday, I guess it was, or something like that. And then when we've got a little more time to step back and take a look at it, we'll look at it in more detail.
That was the compromise, but the policy was never going to be amended for just the principals at Nashua North. It was a generic policy allowing board members just to observe, and that was the full understanding of the HR committee. So we were happy with, as the committee was happy with language, Dr. Mosley intervened on process. The process was it hasn't come to this committee. I had hoped it would be on the agenda. It is not on the agenda. I'm just asking, since we have 45 minutes, to look at the one sentence, see if there's something you want to adjust, send it back to HR, and then, the third reading at the full board.
There was never a request to put that on the agenda for tonight's meeting.
I didn't request it, but I assumed that we would be discussing it because you asked that it go through policy.
Correct, but I didn't say it was going to be in tonight's meeting.
You did not, that's correct. Well, anyway, I've got copies of it.
Well, leave it with us, and then I'm going to talk to Mrs. Ziem about it, because it was not my understanding that
what the situation is this has got a copy of the existing policy, and on the back is the one sentence.
That's all right, I got it. Thank you. Thank you. This is for future.
There will be other directors coming through, unless you would like to have that debate one at a time. Can we get into this one?
We have more directors that we have to hire?
Yes, we do. So I didn't want to have a blow by blow for each position. That's why we started with a policy for any position in this category.
If you had contacted me before this meeting about it, or Ms. Ziem had done that, it might have been different. But we publicize an agenda, and we're supposed to keep to it.
And we had discussed this at HR, and we said that it would eventually go here. And it's board governance. I don't know that teachers would have that big of an input on it. It's the board itself governing itself. And I do believe we have the support to pass it at the full board. So if you wanna use procedure to
Well, let's
delay
see, when we have the directors being interviewed?
It just got advertised, it hasn't even closed yet.
Well, oh, it's just been advertised.
Yeah.
So it could be when
Hopefully.
you have a closing date?
2 weeks from the date of advertisement, but I don't know when Dana did that. I don't know when Dana posted it. I don't know the date. We just got that resignation last week.
Which one?
Ms. Voto,
Oh,
Shell.
well,
We're not meeting again as a policy committee within the next 2 weeks.
that's
when it
right,
starts.
that's right.
So we can either try to deal with it,
I think you ought to take it to the board then.
but then you'll say that I didn't go through the procedures,
Well,
the process.
it's not the first time.
That's the way you would like it, that's what I will do. Because I will do it, because
I know
other
you will.
board members have already talked about wanting to observe.
And Ms. Hohensie, if the HR committee had gone to the board, to this policy committee, initially, you would have probably had an answer. But you circumvented the policy
I
committee.
did not knowingly, deliberately circumvented Mrs. Midway. There's
You
a
were
lot of-
policy chair, you know how this works.
I understand how it
Yep.
works. There's a lot of issues before the board. It came to my attention that it hadn't been put on, and when I realized it, I printed out a copy in the hopes that with our spare time, that we could look at it. If not, we'll have to get another exception, or seek another exception, whether or not we get it.
Is there anything else to come before this committee?
You got your policies, your agenda, whatever.
The
That's,
update.
that's for Ms. Hohensie.
Oh, it's not for.
It is not for
Okay.
discussion.
Okay.
That's the list.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We move to adjourn.
Yes. Second, and all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned at what time?
6:52.
6:52.
See you, Bill.
Okay. Have a good one.
You too.
Bye, Bill.